Hey folks, this is Colin Richards, and I am thrilled to be with you today on another episode of Lord and Richards Radio. Today we're going to be talking about one of the Bible principles that we started in a previous segment found in Matthew 25. And in these Bible segments, we're learning principles that relate to our stewardship. You know, one of the core values at Lord and Richards is that we should manage risk as stewards, not as owners, recognizing that God has committed to us tremendous resources. And you know, the people that we're talking to, like you, every single day are concerned about things going on in our world, in our markets, in our economy. They may adversely affect your retirement. And so what we do for you is we create a financial plan so you can retire without worry. And we do it from a biblical point of view. And so today we're going to start with that foundation, the Bible foundation, as found in our Lord's words in Matthew 25. And in this particular segment, starting in verse 14, we have what's commonly called the parable of the talents. Not talents as in abilities and gifts and so forth, although the stewardship principle that our Lord is discussing here applies to those things and so much more. But actually, the Lord is using the illustration of a monetary talent, a unit of currency, a large weight of silver. And in this parable, which we discussed in a prior segment, we learn that the Lord entrusts in the story to each of three men 3 different amounts: 5 talents for one man, 2 talents for another, 1 for yet another, each according to his ability. So the Lord knows what you and I are capable of and entrusts resources, talents, skills, life circumstances. It's all part of the package that God puts in your hand so you can do amazing things for him with whatever he puts in your hand. So the Lord goes away, and when he returns, the first servant who got the 5 talents doubled them and gets a commendation. The second servant doubled his as well. And what's interesting, and we pointed out last time, is he got the same exact commendation. You see, the Lord knows your ability. Not everybody that's listening to me right now, not you, not others, is necessarily gifted in the same way or has the same monetary resources or the same opportunities. But whatever is before you that God has placed in front of you, that's what he wants you to use for his kingdom and glory, and he wants you to invest it. I'm not just talking about investing in the financial markets, but I'm talking about using it, putting it somewhere where it's going to yield an eternal reward, an eternal return, where it's going to impact lives for generations to come and on out into eternity. Now, when we got to the one servant who received the 1 talent, this individual may well have been an individual the Lord suspected would not give him a return on investment, and so therefore committed less into his hands. That's possible. But when he inquired of this one steward, the steward went beyond just saying, well, Lord, I'm sorry, I was lazy, I should have done more. He actually accuses the Lord in the parable. And look what he says, okay? Partway down in our section here, Matthew 25, 14 to 30, he who had received the 1 talent came forward and says, Master, I knew you to be a hard man. You know, it's difficult, isn't it, sometimes when people not only disappoint, but then they attack to justify why they disappoint, right? And here, this person is attacking the Lord and his motives. He says, you are a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have back what's yours. So he literally says, Lord, I didn't trust you because, you know, I wondered how you were going to judge me. You know, I wondered if I made a mistake, how I would fail. And it's fascinating because the master replies and says, you're wicked and slothful. You knew these things about my character? And there's a question mark in my translation, as if to say, oh, really? Is that what you thought? Is that what you thought? And then he said, if that's really what you thought, you should have just handed my money over to the bank. And then when I came, I would have at least gotten some interest and you wouldn't have had to do anything. But what you actually did was cost me money, right? Because we know the time value of money that's just buried is actually losing value. And so he says, you actually lost me because you wanted to justify your sloth, your laziness, by attacking me. And you know, sometimes if we take this out and apply it to the Lord, not just the master in the parable, but now to our Lord, isn't it possible sometimes we accuse God? We question him for placing us in the circumstances that we're in. Maybe we don't have as many resources as those other two. It's quite possible he had jealousy springing up in his heart because the other two men got between 2 and 5 times more resources put at their disposal. And maybe he was thinking, wow, they got so much more. Clearly, the Lord's got it out for me. And so sometimes in our hearts, maybe not with our words, or maybe actually we go beyond just questioning God. Lord, why did you bring this into my life so I can understand? That's one kind of question. And so I can respond properly. That's another kind of response. But this man actually attacks. And have you ever allowed that to happen? When we're talking about stewardship, there is a tremendous temptation, if you have less than others, to become jealous. I've often seen, even in the area of greed, a lot of times we think, well, people with much are more greedy. But what I've often seen is the same thing, if not greater, with those who have less and will scrap and do anything that they can to get more. Here's the point. God has put something into your hands, your life circumstance, your background, your birth, your economics, the size of your portfolio, and the abilities that you have, so that you can take and use whatever he has put in your hands for his glory. Are you going to question him on that? Are you going to call God to account? Or instead, are you going to be faithful? Because what the other two servants did was they got a commendation regardless of the amount that they had. And the Lord said, you've been faithful over a little, now I'm going to give you much. So it was a test. You see, the stewardship of resources that God has put into your hands, the stewardship of talents, the stewardship of abilities, your background, your circumstances is a test. And it is God's full desire to give you even more so that you can do more for his glory. But he's testing you with what you have in your own hands. The Lord ends the parable and says, take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents, right? Because to everyone who has will more be given. In other words, those who have been faithful, who have reproduced, who have invested what God has given them, are going to have even more responsibility. And guess where they're going to get that from? It's going to be given to them by the Lord from those who prove themselves unfaithful. And from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Wow. And he calls that servant worthless. Wow, I don't want that to happen. When I stand before God, I want to hear what he said to these two men. Well done, good and faithful servant. I hope that's your desire, because in our subsequent segments, and in about 2/3 of the segments that we address here on our podcast, YouTube, and radio program, we talk about the nitty-gritty of finance. And I want you to bring this perspective to it, right? Whether we're talking about inflation or market fears and worries, it's a circumstance that you've been dealt, and God is trusting you to get the wisdom that you need and take the steps that you need to multiply that appropriately for his kingdom, not taking excessive risk, being a careful steward. And so all the principles I'm sharing with you come off of that foundation. Are you a good steward? You say, wow, Colin, I'd like to learn more about how I can be a good steward with the resources I have, how I can do even more for God's kingdom. Well, I would love to chat with you. I'd love to introduce you to our amazing team. It simply starts with a phone call.